Dear listeners, in this video, we will share 50 golden principles inspired by al-Razi's understanding of health. Please listen patiently to the end without skipping any part of the video. To help our video reach a much wider audience, please like the video and leave a short comment. Thank you in advance for your support.
Inhaling thyme or sage steam through the nose opens congestion in the respiratory tract. A warm saltwater gargle soothes inflammation in the throat and relieves hoarseness. In people with a blood excess temperament, dizziness and facial redness are common. Cupping was believed to remove this excess. Chewing a pinch of anise after meals relieves gas in the abdomen. Chewing a few sprigs of fresh thyme before meals stimulates the digestive fire and opens the appetite. Soaking the feet in warm water a few times a week helps balance the body's inner heat. Eating a slice of fresh apple before meals keeps the digestive fire moderate and prevents overeating. Waking up with the sunrise aligns the body's internal clock with its natural rhythm. Fresh morning air is more beneficial to the lungs than medicine taken in the evening. Short daily exposure to sunlight makes the skin more resilient compared to skin that receives no sunlight. Lightly inhaling the scent of coriander or fennel before meals balances bile flow and regulates appetite. Gently brushing the body with a dry cloth once a week helps the skin breathe more easily. Rubbing the teeth with a soft cloth in the morning strengthens the gums. Gently rubbing the forehead and temples before sleep calms the mind tired from thinking. In people suffering from insomnia, the gallbladder works excessively and leaves a bitter taste in the mouth in the morning. Wrapping joints such as the knees and elbows with a warm cloth relieves stiffness in the joints. Chewing a few raisins between meals strengthens the liver. Honey and sugar are processed differently in the body. Honey burns slowly while sugar burns quickly. For this reason, honey was preferred for a weak stomach. Sleep taken before midnight is more restorative than sleep taken after midnight. A hastily swallowed bite passes into the intestines before being fully digested by the stomach and weakens the absorption of nutrients. Entering a hot bath immediately after eating draws the blood needed for digestion away from the stomach toward the skin and weakens digestion. Entering cold water immediately after heavy sweating closes the pores and traps heat inside. Completely starving the body during illness also consumes the strength needed for recovery. In an elderly body with weak digestion, boiled foods create less burden than raw vegetables. Eating heavy meat when the stomach fire is weak causes undigested food to mix into the blood and create heaviness in the body. In a body with excess bile, sour and spicy foods increase fits of anger. Staying under the scorching sun for too long dries the membranes of the brain and causes headaches and nausea. A body that never rests cannot heal. A body that never moves cannot develop. The body may tolerate a single excess, but it cannot tolerate an excess repeated every day. In people with excess stomach acid, burning in the chest begins when lying down at night. Sleeping in a more upright position reduces this burning. Constipation leaves heaviness and dullness not only in the abdomen, but also in the head. If the liver is weak, fatty foods mix into the blood before being fully digested and cause the skin to appear yellowish. In people dominated by a phlegmatic temperament, dry mouth and heaviness in the chest are seen in the morning. If the lungs are moist, the cough is not dry but phlegmy. A dry climate removes this moisture. When phlegm turns yellow during a cold, it is a sign that the body has entered a defensive state. Loss of appetite without weight loss was often seen by physicians as a sign related not to the stomach, but to the liver. Frequent white spots on the nails were considered a sign of imbalance in the body's mineral salt levels. A whitish coating appearing on the tongue was often considered a sign of imbalance in the stomach and intestines. Yellowing of the whites of the eyes was considered an early sign that the liver had lost its filtering power. Twitching of the eyelid was considered a sign of temporary weakness in the nerve strength of that area. Hair loss was often associated with reduced blood flow to the scalp, meaning weak circulation. Bleeding gums indicate either an excess of the blood temperament or a vitamin C deficiency. Neither should be ignored. Frequent recurring nosebleeds were attributed to an imbalance of blood pressure in the head region. Constant sweating of the palms was considered a sign of an overstimulated nervous system. Night sweats were considered a sign that the body was releasing at night the heat it had suppressed during the day. Increased bone pain in cold weather suggests that the joint fluid thickens in winter. Increased knee pain while going downstairs was considered an early sign that the joint cartilage was beginning to wear down. In kidney weakness, a dull pain appears in the lower back and foam may appear in the urine. People with a warm heart temperament are more prone to palpitations from spicy foods, while those with a cold temperament are more prone to feeling cold. Taking a short and slow walk after meals helps digestion without disturbing the stomach and reduces the heaviness that forms in the body after eating. These 50 principles may sound like simple pieces of advice, but behind them stands a complete way of looking at the human body. For al-Razi, the body was never silent. It spoke constantly through appetite, through sleep, through breath, through heaviness, through the color of the skin and the rhythm of the pulse. In this ancient understanding, illness did not begin the day a person collapsed. It began much earlier, in small disturbances that most people learned to ignore. A stomach that resisted its food, a mind that could not settle into rest, a breath that grew shallow without anyone noticing. Al-Razi would have seen these not as minor inconveniences, but as early language, the body's own way of describing an imbalance before that imbalance became a disease with a name. This is the heart of what we might call his preventive philosophy. Medicine, in his view, was not only the treatment of the sick, it was the ongoing observation of the living. A physician who waited for suffering to become unbearable before paying attention had already arrived too late. The wiser path was to notice the first change, the first heaviness after a meal, the first restlessness in sleep, the first dullness in the eyes, and to treat these as messages rather than accidents. In this understanding, the body was something like a lamp that dims gradually before it goes dark. No lamp fails without first flickering. No balance is lost without first tilting. Digestion held a central place in this worldview. It was often described in terms close to fire, a quiet internal heat responsible for transforming food into strength rather than burden. When that fire was strong and steady, food became nourishment. When it was weakened by haste, by excess, by food taken at the wrong time or in the wrong condition, what entered the body could not be properly used. It lingered instead, turning into heaviness, into discomfort, into the very complaints so many people carried without ever tracing them back to their origin. This is why eating too quickly was seen as a quiet danger. A meal swallowed without patience placed a demand on the body that it could not meet gracefully, and what should have become vitality instead became strain. Sleep, too, was treated with a seriousness that modern life often forgets. The hours before midnight were understood as a distinct kind of rest, a period in which the body repaired itself more deeply than in the hours that followed. To sleep late and rise late was not simply a matter of habit. It was believed to disturb a natural order that the body depended on, an order tied to darkness, stillness, and the quiet work of restoration that could not be rushed or replaced. Breath and air carried a similar weight. Clean morning air was valued not as a pleasant detail, but as something the lungs and the whole body relied upon for renewal. A room without light or movement of air was seen as a place where stagnation could quietly take hold, first in the air itself and eventually in the person who breathed it day after day. Perhaps most importantly, this medicine did not separate the body into isolated parts. The stomach, the liver, the lungs, the skin, the nerves, all were understood as connected, each affecting the others in ways that were felt long before they could be explained. A disturbance in one place rarely stayed in that place alone. This is why physicians of this tradition paid such close attention to details that might seem small: the coating on the tongue, the smell of the breath, the change in appetite, the pattern of sweat, the sudden heaviness in the limbs. None of these were treated as trivial. Each was a signal, a small piece of evidence pointing toward the larger state of the body. Emotion, too, was never separated from physical health. Anger, fear, sadness, and prolonged stress were understood as forces that moved through the body just as food and air did, altering its rhythm, its heat, its balance. A person who carried unresolved anger or unspoken grief was not, in this view, only suffering emotionally. They were placing a quiet burden on organs that had no language of their own to protest. What made this approach so enduring was its closeness to daily life. It did not ask people to master complicated theory. It asked them to pay attention, to eat with awareness, to rest with intention, to notice discomfort instead of pushing past it. In the spirit of this medical approach, the goal was never to chase a single cure. It was to understand the person as a whole, living system, one capable of telling its own story to anyone patient enough to listen. This way of thinking placed a particular kind of responsibility on the individual, not the heavy responsibility of guilt, but the quieter responsibility of attention. In this ancient understanding, a person did not need to be a physician to notice that something had shifted. They only needed to be willing to observe themselves honestly, the way a gardener notices when a plant begins to lean, long before its leaves fall. The body, like a garden, rarely fails without warning. It gives small signs first: a change in color, a change in posture, a change in the way it responds to what once felt ordinary. Moderation, in this view, was not a restriction imposed from outside. It was understood as the natural state the body sought for itself. Excess of any kind, food taken beyond need, sleep taken beyond its proper hour, emotion held without release, was seen as a departure from that natural state, a small step away from balance. What made excess dangerous was rarely the single instance. A single heavy meal, a single sleepless night, a single outburst of anger, the body could absorb these and recover. What al-Razi's medicine seemed to caution against was repetition, the same imbalance repeated day after day until the body no longer had the space to correct itself. In this understanding, disease was rarely a sudden arrival. It was the slow accumulation of ignored signals, each one small, each one dismissed, until together they became something the body could no longer carry quietly. This is why the physicians of this tradition were so attentive to what might be called the minor complaints, the ones a person could easily explain away. A little fatigue was blamed on a busy week. A little heaviness after eating was blamed on the meal itself, not the pattern behind it. A little irritability was blamed on circumstance, not on a body that had not rested properly in days. Al-Razi's medicine would have seen these explanations as convenient, but often incomplete. Behind the busy week, behind the difficult meal, behind the irritation, there was often a body quietly asking for something it had not been given: rest, air, patience, or simply attention. There is something deeply human in this approach, because it did not treat the sick person as a separate category from the healthy one. It treated every person as someone in motion, moving either toward balance or away from it, day by day, meal by meal, night by night. Health was not a fixed possession to be kept in a locked room. It was closer to a fire that had to be tended, one that could burn steadily for a long life if it was fed with care, or one that could be worn down slowly by neglect, disguised as busyness. In this spirit, the practical principles offered earlier were never meant to function as isolated tricks or shortcuts. They were small expressions of a much larger idea, that the body is always communicating, and that the person who learns its language early is far better prepared than the one who only listens once the voice has become a cry. A physician working within this tradition was not only treating illness. They were teaching observation, teaching patience, teaching a kind of quiet literacy in the signs of the human body. This is perhaps the most lasting part of al-Razi's medical worldview, not any single remedy, but a way of relating to oneself. To eat with awareness rather than haste. To rest with intention rather than exhaustion. To notice discomfort instead of overriding it. To understand anger, fear, and sadness not as separate from the body, but as forces moving through it. In this understanding, health was never a destination reached once and forgotten. It was a relationship, renewed each day, between a person and the quiet, constant intelligence of their own body. There is another dimension to this worldview that deserves attention, the relationship between the physician and the person being treated. In this tradition, medicine was never reduced to a fixed formula applied equally to every body. Al-Razi's approach, close to daily life and rooted in observation, would have resisted the idea that the same remedy could serve every person in the same way. Two people could carry the same complaint and yet need entirely different care, because their constitutions, their habits, their histories were not the same. This is why so much of ancient medicine relied on watching before acting, on listening to a person's daily patterns before offering guidance. The physician was not someone who diagnosed from a distance. They were someone who paid attention to the particular rhythm of a particular life. This attentiveness extended to the way illness itself was understood. A disease was rarely seen as an isolated event that appeared out of nowhere. It was seen as the end point of a longer story, one that had usually been unfolding quietly for weeks or months before it became visible. The fatigue that seemed to arrive suddenly had often been building for a long time. The digestive trouble that seemed to appear overnight had likely been forming through many small meals eaten in haste, many nights of insufficient rest, many moments of tension carried without release. In this understanding, the moment of visible illness was not the beginning of the problem. It was simply the moment the body could no longer keep the problem hidden. It is worth imagining the body in this tradition as something like a small kingdom, with its own governance, its own order, its own delicate systems of exchange. The stomach could be seen as the kitchen that fed the entire structure, the lungs as the gateway through which the outside world was allowed in, the liver as a quiet keeper of balance, filtering what should remain from what should be released, the nerves as messengers, carrying signals from one part of the kingdom to another. When one office within this kingdom grew weak, the effects were rarely confined to that office alone. A kitchen that could not properly prepare its food left the entire kingdom underfed. A gateway that let in only stale air left the whole structure without renewal. This is why ancient physicians so rarely treated a single symptom as though it existed by itself. They asked what else in the kingdom might be affected, and what earlier disturbance might have set this chain of events in motion. Within this worldview, the emotional life of a person was treated as another province of the same kingdom, not a separate realm entirely. Fear was understood to tighten the body, sadness to slow it, anger to heat it, and prolonged unease to exhaust it in ways that mirrored physical exertion, even when a person had not moved from their chair all day. This is part of why ancient medicine placed such value on calmness, not as an abstract virtue, but as something with real bearing on the body's condition. A person who moved through life in a state of constant agitation was, in this understanding, placing a continual tax on their own vitality, one that eventually had to be paid somewhere, whether in the stomach, the chest, the sleep, or the skin. None of this was presented as mysticism. It was presented as observation, patient and repeated, carried out across many lives and many years, until certain patterns became clear enough to be trusted. A person who ate in haste tended, over time, to suffer more digestive trouble than one who ate slowly. A person who slept irregularly tended to grow more fragile in mood and more prone to illness than one who kept steady hours. A person who ignored small pains tended to meet larger ones later. These were not laws imposed from outside the body. They were patterns read from within it, gathered the way any careful observer gathers understanding through attention sustained over time. What remains striking, even now, is how much of this ancient attentiveness asks for nothing more than honesty with oneself. Not extreme discipline, not rare herbs, not complicated rituals, but the willingness to notice. To notice that a meal eaten in 5 rushed minutes feels different than one eaten slowly. To notice that a night of true rest changes the entire tone of the following day. To notice that anger held too long begins to sit somewhere in the chest, and that unspoken grief begins to sit somewhere in the shoulders. Al-Razi's medicine, in this sense, was less about instructing the body and more about learning to hear what it had been saying all along. There is one more thread in this way of thinking that deserves to be drawn out: the idea that time itself was medicine. Not time in the abstract, but the ordinary passage of days lived with attention, meal after meal, night after night, season after season. Nothing in this tradition promised sudden transformation. A single well-rested night did not undo months of exhaustion. A single mindful meal did not repair a digestion worn down by years of haste. What healed in this understanding was consistency, the slow, patient repetition of small right choices. The same way a single drop of water means little, but water falling steadily over years can shape stone. Al-Razi's medicine would have asked less for intensity and more for endurance, less for a dramatic gesture and more for a quiet, sustained faithfulness to the body's needs. This is part of why ancient physicians were often as concerned with a person's habits as with their symptoms. A symptom was a single frame taken from a much longer film. To treat only the symptom without asking what daily pattern had produced it was to treat a shadow while ignoring the shape casting it. If a person suffered the same complaint again and again, the deeper question was never simply what remedy might quiet it this time, but what daily rhythm kept bringing it back. In this view, true care meant looking backward into a person's ordinary days as much as looking forward toward relief. There was also a kind of humility built into this worldview, a recognition that the body could not be commanded the way a tool is commanded. It could only be persuaded, gradually, through conditions that allowed it to do what it already knew how to do. A wound did not heal because a physician forced it to. It healed because the body's own restorative capacity was given the conditions, the rest, the nourishment, the calm in which that capacity could act. In this sense, the physician's role was closer to a gardener's than to a craftsman's. A craftsman shapes material into a form it would not take on its own. A gardener creates the conditions in which growth, already present as potential, can unfold naturally. Al-Razi's medicine, understood this way, was not about overriding the body, but about clearing the obstacles that kept it from doing what it was already inclined to do. This is perhaps why the 50 principles offered earlier read less like commands and more like observations, translated into guidance. They do not ask a person to fight against their own nature. They ask a person to stop interrupting it, to stop overriding hunger with haste, stillness with restlessness, rest with unnecessary strain. Each principle, in this light, becomes a small act of cooperation with a body that has been trying all along to maintain its own balance. It would be a mistake to imagine this ancient view as primitive simply because it lacked the instruments of later centuries. What it lacked in precision, it often made up for in patience, in the willingness to watch a single person closely over long stretches of time, to notice what modern life, with its speed and its distractions, so often fails to notice in itself. There is a kind of attentiveness in this tradition that remains relevant, not because every explanation it offered was correct in the way we now understand the body, but because the underlying posture, careful observation, patient correction, respect for small signals, still holds value regardless of the century. In the end, what this ancient medical worldview offers is not a set of fixed answers, but a way of paying attention that can be carried into any life, in any era. It suggests that health is not something that happens to a person from the outside, delivered by a remedy or a cure, but something cultivated from within, through the accumulation of small, honest choices repeated over time. It suggests that the body is never truly silent, that it is always speaking through appetite, through breath, through sleep, through the subtle shifts in mood and energy that so many people learn to override rather than understand. And it suggests that the wisest response to this constant communication is not fear and not indifference, but attention, the same quiet, patient attention that a physician in this tradition would have brought to any person seeking to understand not just their illness, but their life. This is where we leave the body, not as a mystery to be feared, but as a companion to be understood, one meal, one breath, one night of rest at a time. If there is a single thought worth carrying beyond this video, let it be this: your body has never stopped speaking to you. It speaks in small ways, in quiet hours, long before it ever needs to raise its voice. In the spirit of this ancient wisdom, may you learn to listen a little earlier and live a little more attentively, day by day. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this journey into the old wisdom of the body meant something to you, consider sharing it with someone who needs a little more balance in their days, and we will meet again in the next story from the old world of healing.